Hello, everybody. Welcome to Devil Details episode 2. This episode, we're getting into it. We're talking about the first 2 episodes of Blackbird. My name is Sarah.
And I'm Kristen. We're going to talk all about episode 1 and 2 and dive through and give our thoughts and feelings and go basically scene by scene for each episode and give you all the good stuff.
Yep, we're going to break it down for you. We're going to give all of our observations on everything and just get really into it. So first of all, Kristen, how did you feel going into watching the show for the first time? Like, what was going on in your mind? Like, right before you hit play, what was happening?
Butterflies. It was weird. I was I don't know if it was anxious, nervous, excited. There's that word again.
Our favorite
But I
word.
was kept watching the clock because I knew it was going to be live at 8 p.m. So I was watching the clock all night, waiting for it. And then as soon as I got the alert on my phone that it was live, I kind of had to take a deep breath and
it's real. It's here.
Calm myself. And I was like, okay, here we go.
It's happening.
How about you?
Yeah, I was feeling a lot of the same stuff. I was at work all day, and the episode dropped the minute that I got off work, and I knew it was happening because Apple TV releases their episodes at weird times. So for me, I'm in Alaska, so it drops at 5 p.m. my time, right when I get off work. So I could not focus at work all day because I knew it was coming, and I knew it was going to be immediately when I get off work. The show was going to be available, and people were going to be watching it. And so I got the alert on my phone, just like you said. Apple TV said, new show available, and that, made it a real moment. And I I was driving home, and I had that in my head, and I had seen that. I got emotional, honestly, which is so embarrassing to say, but I really did get emotional because I've been waiting for this show. We've been waiting for it officially we've been waiting for it for about a year and a half now. But as a huge Taron Egerton fan, we've been waiting for something like this for a lot longer than a year,
time, 3 years
it's
since
been
his last.
3 years since Rocket Man, which was his last really big project. And so, it's been a long time. And finally, knowing that we were gonna see him on screen and see him do his thing that we knew he was so proud of and wanting to show the world. So that got a little emotional for me. I didn't cry or anything, but I was really like clutching my chest, like, oh, this is happening. And so I got home. I got everyone in my household, ready. I was like, once we hit play, there's no talking, no moving, no blocking the screen, no pausing. This is a big moment, and we need to focus and get ready for it. And so we kind of all got settled and hit play. And
it was kind of like I don't know what, like, not a relief, but like a type moment when you hit play and you saw the intro start.
Right. Like, oh, it's finally happening. It's not just
like it's real. It's not, something that you keep hearing about and never comes to fruition. Right. It was like, this is real now.
It's real. It's happening. It's on the screen.
Yeah.
It's real. So we're going to start with episode 1 and focus on episode 1 first. And then we'll take a little break, which we have a little surprise for you guys during the break, which is probably not going to be a surprise. I'll put it in the show description what it is. So in between our 2 episode talks, we're going to have a little interview with a very special guest that we have talked to, named Hillel Levin, who is the author, the co-author of In with the Devil, who wrote the book with James Keene. We had a lot of fun.
He's amazing to listen to.
Yeah, he has a lot of cool things to say about a lot of stuff. So we're going to, part of that interview is going to be in this episode, and then we'll release another episode with the full interview, because he had a lot of cool stuff to talk about that we couldn't just shove into one episode. We had to give it its own episode. So,
and we want to make sure you hear it all, because it was really fascinating to listen to him speak.
He's worked on a lot of cool stuff besides this story too that we talked to him about. So we're really happy to bring that to you and have you guys listen to that. So we're going to just start off with episode 1 right now. So Kristen, what is episode 1?
So episode 1 is called Pilot, and it is Jimmy Keene is living in the fast lane until he gets a 10-year prison sentence. Behind bars, he's approached about a high-stakes deal for freedom. Didn't really give a whole lot, but...
Right, but we'll get into it.
Yes.
So the first thing that we see when we press play is this intro sequence, which is so cool. I was into it. It shows, you can tell that a lot of these scenes that are kind of flashing are going to be in the show at some point. Like it's showing like Larry Hall's in there, and it's showing, you see a little flash of Brian Miller and stuff. So you see people who are in the show. So we're going to see probably those scenes later on in the show.
I liked how it looked like old news footage or home video type footage. It gave
Yeah.
that feel of a home video type.
It was also a very 90s feel for me.
Yes, I was just going to say that.
Which is good. This all takes place kind
Yes.
of in the mid 90s.
Yeah.
And that definitely came across. And then the music was cool too. It's the whole show is scored by Mogul. They created the score for the whole show, including the title sequence, and it really,
it's really good.
Yeah, it really gives a cool sort of vibe to the whole thing.
Yeah, it kind of adds to the intensity of what the show is going to be like. It gives you that feel just jumping right into it.
For sure. It really ties over the moments. So we have the intro, and then it opens with Taron Egerton as Jimmy Keene giving a little voiceover speech. So right off the bat, we have to talk about this because...
Yes, I was going to say, I have something to say about this. So the first second, brief moment, I didn't realize that was Taron speaking at first.
Yeah,
because
he does not
the
sound like
accent
Taron.
is so good. I had to really listen for a second, and it took 4 or 5 words of him speaking before I realized that it was him.
Yeah.
So kudos to him and his dialogue coach.
Yes.
Carter? Was that
Carter Bellamy, yeah.
Yeah.
Who was Taron Egerton's dialogue coach, because Taron Egerton is British. He has a British accent regularly, and so this is him doing his American accent, which he has not done a lot in the past for other projects. One in particular, he has done an American accent, but in this he sounds really good. I mean, I think if people didn't know that he was British, it would be 100% believable.
Yeah, because you couldn't even hear a faint British accent, because sometimes I feel like when British actors do an American accent, some of their vowels, you can tell that they're not native American.
Yeah, they kind of
English speakers
drop into it.
His was really good. Like, it took me a minute to be like, oh wow. That's his voice.
Yeah. And so this is Jimmy Keene talking, and he mentions like the butterfly effect, where, if a butterfly flaps its wings, then it'll cause, what did he say, a hurricane in Miami.
Yeah.
I think the way that he said it kind of immediately gives you an insight into his character, because it's kind of like sassy almost. It's really just, if you don't know, look it up, it's kind of just like, duh, whatever. Yeah. It basically says that everything is connected, even if you don't realize it. And then it shows Jessica Roach, played by Lainey Stibing, and she's on her bike, and she's wearing like red Converse shoes. And Jimmy's talking about how he doesn't know this girl, but they're connected. And so that kind of tells us like the story is going to be about Jimmy and how he's connected to the story of Jessica Roach through Larry Hall. So then we get our first visual of Taron as Jimmy Keene. In the next scene, we see him in his house, sort of like in this man cave.
It was very dark.
Yeah, it was dark, and there was like an arcade game thing in there, and a big TV, and his friends on a couch. Bar. Yeah, he was like behind this bar.
They were watching Jimmy's, I'm assuming, high school football highlight reel. And
it sort of gives us exposition on who Jimmy is and who he was. He was, a star football player, and they talk about them and how he's Kankakee's, golden son or whatever they said.
I got the impression that he, in that moment, was kind of thinking like, this, I could have done something more with my life, but this is what I'm doing now.
But then
he had that moment
shoving stuff into a bag.
Giant blocks of drugs,
kilos of cocaine in a bag. And so that brings us to a next scene where
he's at a warehouse. Well, they are talking, and then he goes to leave.
Yeah, so he shows up at and he meets up with this guy who's named Raj, who's like a drug supplier. And apparently there was either a miscommunication or something happened where Jimmy was shorted. He was shorted a kilo that he was supposed to get from this dealer, and the dealer said,
it's not his fault.
It's not his fault. Why do you think it's my fault. And he says that his friend Danny told him it was his fault.
Right. And he has no reason not to believe him because he grew up with the guy. He's like family.
Right. But then cut to Danny bloodied and beat up. And Jimmy immediately knows, oh, great. Well,
Yeah.
something's happened here and this
Something
is
happened.
what is going on. So it turns out that Danny was the one who took the drugs.
Yeah. And when they first shot the gun, when that guy first shot towards Danny,
Directly,
I gasped.
directly
I was
into
like,
his chest.
I was like, oh my God.
I particularly wanted to talk about this scene just because it's also a story in the book. This actually happened with Jimmy's friend. In the book, it was a Mexican drug person, though. Like, he had to cross the border to Mexico to deal with this and pick up his friend Danny, who had basically been kidnapped by these people. Right. So this is all based on a real story, which a lot of the show is.
Loosely based on some parts.
Yes.
This scene with the yelling, because they get intense as the scene goes on, you could feel the anxiety and the desperation in it.
I mean, Jimmy's
it
screaming.
made me anxious.
And yeah.
Yeah, like just the screaming and the throwing of the drugs on the table and the gun and not knowing what was going to happen and the music. I don't even know if there was music playing, but it just felt very anxious and chaotic, and
right.
It made me feel like I was sitting in the room with them.
So, yeah, it was good.
Yeah, it was intense.
So after they take care after Jimmy takes care of Danny and gets all that sorted, then basically is like paying the supplier back for the kilos that he accused them of taking.
And Danny's life is not worth more than 3 kilos.
It's not worth more than 3 kilos. Yeah. But then we go to we cut to
he's in the shower.
Yeah, it kind of shows Jimmy's house and like the spoils of his, drug dealer life. He has a really fancy house, a huge walk-in closet. He's wearing a gold chain while he's in the shower. And, it's very
over the top.
Yeah,
luxury.
It's very luxurious, his life.
Yeah.
The spoils of his drug money.
Yeah. His very nice clothes and
yes. And then so we cut to him at like a bar or at a restaurant, and he is talking to this.
He's like zoned out at first.
Right.
Like he's just staring out the window.
And so the server named Rochelle kind of has to grab his attention. I wrote down, she's played by Cecilia Leal, Rochelle, and they sort of talk, and then he is giving her the eyes. Like, I need her.
It's definitely a flirty, charming look.
Yeah, very flirty, very much like almost predatory in a way.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, very dominant.
Right. And I mean, he brought her home and they're having sex on his couch right after that. Full, you see the full Terran peach there.
Yep. Doesn't leave a whole lot to the imagination.
Right.
But it shows like the lifestyle that he was living. Like,
right.
No cares, no real thought into anything. Just kind of did what he wanted to do, and
he's got money and looks and charm, and he uses it to just do whatever he wants.
Yep. And then it cuts to him the next morning.
Yep.
Getting making a smoothie, I guess.
Right, like a breakfast.
It was a weird color.
Shake. Yeah.
Because it looked green in one shot, and then it was yellow. So, and he was drinking it straight out of the blender.
Yeah, straight out of the giant blender.
Yeah, it looked like he was going to go work out, maybe. Because he had shoes on, which was weird.
Yeah, no clothes on, but he was wearing shoes and shorts.
Yeah. But like running shoes, they were not just like. So I don't know if he was drinking his protein shake before he went to work out or what.
But yeah, during this whole time, the FBI and DEA agents, you can kind of see them in the windows in the background, and Jimmy doesn't really clock it. I think he feels like something weird is about to happen.
Or hears something, like rustling or something. Yeah, they're like surrounding his door, all of his windows in the kitchen. And meanwhile, the girl Rochelle is still sleeping on the couch.
Yep.
I'm assuming she was sleeping.
Or pretending to sleep so that she didn't have to deal with whatever was going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, so then, DEA FBI agents come in and tackle him and shake
goes everywhere. And I don't know if it was, I'm sure it was choreographed for this, but when they push him onto the counter, by his neck, and the shake flings up in the air and like beautifully splatters. I'm sure that was planned the way that happened.
Or just artfully splatters. It's
Yes, and like
everywhere.
on him, but on the floor and on the counter, and he like slides across the counter.
Right. And this whole time he's smirking and smiling
Mhm.
and laughing. He's like, this is hilarious.
Yeah, like I've been here before. I'll be fine.
Right. Like nothing's gonna happen. You guys have
Yeah,
nothing on me.
yeah.
Turns out they do have stuff on him.
They have quite a bit of things on him.
They do. And so this scene is when we first see Lauren McCauley, Seppi Mawafi,
Mhm.
and she calls him Jimbo, which is
Jimbo.
fun. He does not like that.
He does not like that.
And then it shows like his stash of just drugs and cash and guns.
Bullets
Yeah.
and
Scales.
and he's still very cocky in that moment.
Yeah, he never
Like he's
drops
sitting at
it.
the table.
Yeah. And he's laughing the whole time and
Mhm.
he's like, I have good lawyers. He's very cocky about the whole thing.
Yeah. Like he's like, I'll be fine.
Right. But then, that kind of goes away immediately because the next
Mhm.
scene is Jimmy in jail waiting to talk to his dad, which he's happy to see his dad, but he's definitely not happy to
Yeah.
be there.
No. And during that scene, you could kind of see the desperation in his eyes and face to want to please his dad. Like, what do I need to do to make you happy? And Big Jim says something like, I wish I would, I had better dreams for you. I wanted you to have a wife, a kid, a dog. And you can kind of see on Jimmy's face, like, I want to do what pleases him. So I want to make him happy.
Yeah.
So I have to get out to
And
make him
that's
happy.
Big Jim, who's played by Ray Liotta. And yeah, he told Jimmy that he wanted all these great things for his life, but then Jimmy's like, I couldn't have that life because I needed to help you. And so that clues us into like, oh, like he's funding his dad's whole lifestyle too. And in the book they talk about that a lot, how Big Jim is spending a lot of Jimmy's money, and Jimmy's happy to do it. He's happy to give his dad all the money that he could possibly want or need, but he also says like he was spending the money faster than I can make it. So yeah, that is kind of hinted at there where he says, I couldn't have helped you if I lived that life.
But he wants to do what he can. Like he want like that. He's desperate to please him.
Yeah, so Big Jim tells Jimmy about Beaumont, who's a prosecutor. Oh, he also says that Beaumont is trying to prove that he's not part of the machine. And then Big Jim says that I was part of the machine. And so that, I think, is referring to how he was a cop, but he was also like, he wasn't a clean cop, basically.
Right. He was a little shady.
Yeah. So he worked both sides in a lot of stuff like that. So he was part of the machine. And yeah, so he tells Jimmy to plea out and that he should only get 5 years in jail for, out and for good behavior or whatever. Tells him to take the plea deal that Beaumont is offering. And so, yeah, it goes to Jimmy being in court and pleading guilty. We see Beaumont, who's played by Robert Wisdom, and he takes the plea deal and then the judge
flips the switch.
Yeah, he drops it and he says, you are sentenced to 120 months, 10 years.
And it took me a moment to figure out that was 10 years, by the way.
Like, oh, you're making me do
how
math?
bad my math is. I was like, wait, what?
120 months. That's okay. 12 months in a year.
Yeah. Add the zero. But then Jimmy says it for me. So then I knew.
10 years. And he is mad.
He's big mad.
Big mad. Because he's claiming that Beaumont lied to him. Beaumont worked with him on this plea deal and it was supposed to be 5 years and it ended up being 10. So I think that really establishes this lack of trust between Beaumont and Jimmy that is going to come into play later. More in episode 2, I think, than this episode. But it kind of establishes Beaumont and Jimmy's relationship a little bit.
Yeah, because he kind of bait and switched him.
Yeah.
Bait and switch. Yeah.
Then it's 7 months later. So Jimmy's been in prison for 7 months now.
And it seems a fairly low security type prison because he had kind of freedom to kind of walk around inside. He wasn't locked behind his door.
Right. So that tracks. It's like a medium security, I think, where he was placed because he's just in there for drugs and guns, I guess.
I think that was the big one that got him. Was the guns.
That got him the full 10 years. And so they bring him into this dentist office in the prison, and
Mm-hmm.
Lauren McCauley and Beaumont are both in there waiting to talk to him. And we
Yeah.
learn Lauren McCauley introduces herself and kind of is laying on the charm a little bit with Jimmy to try and
Mm-hmm.
sort of get in with him, I think, to convince him to
Yeah, to
do
kind
this
of
deal.
get on his side. And I liked that the trailer, because the trailer shows a part of this
Mm-hmm.
scene, but I like that it didn't show the full dialogue in the trailer.
Yeah, it switched it up a
Like it
little bit.
was very, and they'd used different language in the
Stronger
actual show
language.
than they did in the trailer. I think they filmed a specific version for the trailer, but I like that they didn't show the full scope of that scene,
Right.
because that scene was really good.
It is. And yeah, so we learn more about Jimmy's prison life too in that scene, where he rents out dirty magazines to the other inmates to raise some cash
Side
so
hustle.
that he can get
Better food, fresh vegetables, and what was the other? Lean cut meat.
Yeah, prison food sucks.
Yeah.
And the way that Macaulay talks to Jimmy is very, she calls him charming, and she understands him, but she's also not taken by his charms. She's really serious about this deal and about her job, and she knows how to get into Jimmy's head too, and you can kind of see that in this scene and more so throughout the show.
Yeah, she doesn't take any punches, but she knows how to work it so that he agrees with her.
Yeah, she's very smart. She's worked this out and definitely done her research.
She knows what she's doing.
Yes. And yeah, so she drops this deal on him, and Jimmy is like, no, like, I'm not going to do that. And then she says, well, what if you got your freedom? And that intrigues him for sure.
Yes. Cheek flinch.
Yes. That makes him think twice about it for sure. But he still is like, no, I'm not going to do that. And so they leave Larry Hall's file with him, like, look this over and, reconsider the fact that you're going to spend 10 years in here if you don't do this, basically. Yeah. And yeah, so that's when it cuts to our first sighting of Detective Brian Miller, Greg Kinnear.
Yeah, but he's at a flag football game?
Yes.
Soccer game?
He's at his daughter's flag football game. And
like in the middle of the game, a police officer comes up and calls him over, and we find out that it's because they found a body of a case that they were working on.
Yes, they found the body of Jessica Roach in a cornfield, and she was strangled, and so that and it's revealed that it's the same girl from the very first scene of the episode, the girl with the red Converse shoes. Oh, I saw that the director of photography, Natalie Kingston, she said that this scene in the cornfield where they see Jessica's body was like the hottest day that they ever filmed at.
You could tell.
Yeah.
It looked hot.
Very hot.
I would assume most of their filming was very hot.
Yeah.
It was a very hot summer last year.
Yeah, and this is all filmed in the South.
And I was not in New Orleans, but...
Yeah. I think there was some stuff that was filmed in Georgia, I want to say, that I've read. All the prison stuff was filmed in New Orleans for sure, and a lot of it was there. But I think, like, as far as like the cornfield stuff and a lot of that side of things was filmed, all in the South, where it was very hot over the summer.
Yeah, humid. And then I think there was a hurricane that came through.
Yeah, a big one.
New Orleans last year, which makes things much more humid.
And yeah, it stopped production. Everyone had to evacuate for a while. It was a big deal.
Yeah.
And made the weather so much worse.
Yes, it's very sticky.
Yeah.
I enjoyed how they flash from Jimmy in jail, in prison, and then Greg Kinnear's story, the detective and homicide type case, kind of how they were going at the same time, but kind of connected them. It was pretty seamless how they flashed from one to the other.
Yeah. And
it didn't feel disjointed at all.
Yeah, and it's very interesting because they're flashing between both these stories kind of back and forth from now until the rest of the episode. The part with the investigation with Greg Kinnear's character Brian Miller is earlier. Like, Jimmy's stuff is happening in 96, and then they're sort of flashing back to like 1994 with the investigation and the Jessica Roach murder and stuff like that. That is happening before. So that part, eventually the story connects, but it's sort of like a flashback, and then they're flash forwarding back to Jimmy being in jail and his whole deal.
But it doesn't feel like you're kind of bouncing. It's very it flows really well.
It's the same story, but it's two different stories at the same time.
Yeah.
And you feel that. I made a note here to mention that Greg Kinnear is left-handed, and I didn't know that before. And I am also left-handed, so I have to, like, I take note of whenever I see someone on TV left-handed. I'm like, oh, he's left-handed.
Must be a left-hander thing, because my sister said the same thing.
Right, it is. It totally is. Like, I pointed to the screen even, and like, there was a rule where no one could talk, but I still pointed to the screen and pointed to my mom was watching with me, and she's also left-handed. So I was like, look, he's left-handed.
In fact, my sister even at one point, Taryn is eating with his left hand, and she goes, "Is he left-handed?"
But he's not. But maybe he eats
He's
left-handed,
not.
or maybe it was just for the scene.
He was cutting his meat with his right hand, so he was using his fork with the left, which, as a right-handed person, I do that too.
That's normal. Yeah, I cut with my left hand.
She pointed out the left-handedness of Greg Kinnear as well.
That's so funny. So after they find Jessica Roach's body, they talk to a witness who saw that there was a Dodge van and there was a white man. He didn't really know anything else. He didn't even know the color of the van. Just that it was a Dodge van. But that's a big clue.
He's a mechanic.
Yeah, he's a mechanic. So he knows what make the car is, but he doesn't know the color or what the guy looks like, even though Larry has very distinct features. So you think he would recognize something.
But the Dodge is very important because that comes back.
It does.
Into play.
That's a big clue. And so it cuts to 13 months after they find her body. That's when Brian Miller finds a report of two girls getting harassed by a guy in a Dodge van. And so that gives him the lead, and they figure out that van belongs to Larry. So that's big.
Yes. And he has to make a lot of like phone calls to see where there's reenactments and
So he calls
Larry's really into Civil War reenactments.
So that's another big clue that Miller finds is he talks to Chris Drysdale, who's a detective in Indiana, and he tells him that Larry does Civil War reenactments. So that's a big clue.
Yeah.
And then so Jimmy, it cuts back to Jimmy again, and he's talking to his dad, and he tells him he's considering this deal that the FBI brought to him, and Big Jim's like, no, don't do this. He's very opposed to him taking this deal.
Yeah, because what happens if it doesn't go right?
He would end up being stuck in this maximum security place. He could get time added to his sentence. It's a bad idea. Big Jim says, no, don't do it.
And this is only Ray Liotta's second scene, and it's a small, they're short scenes so far. He's amazing. Not that I was surprised.
Right, he's so good in this.
Yeah, he plays it really well. And even Taryn and Ray, even though they're essentially blocked by a plexiglass type of a thing, their chemistry is really good together. And, they're separated. They're not face to face.
Yeah, they have this connection, and they're really... You can tell that they have kind of a complicated relationship, but it's a really loving father and son relationship there. And it comes, like you said, it's only been 2 scenes, but it really is coming across already. So it's really cool.
Yeah. I'm excited to see more future episodes.
And this is also, we see like a montage, sort of like a prison life montage. So we see like Jimmy working out, and he's like running in the yard and lifting weights and stuff and dealing out these porno magazines. And it kind of is giving you this vibe, like generally just showing how he's unhappy in prison. And
debating the plea, or not the plea,
the deal. Yeah, this deal with the FBI.
The deal, yeah. But it also shows that he was kind of the big guy on campus at this prison. Like, he was the guy people went to, and he was the tough guy. And I think that'll kind of foreshadows how he's not going to be in the next prison. I thought that was interesting.
And we also see it cuts back and forth a lot between Jimmy's side and Greg Kinnear's, Brian Miller's
The end
side.
Of the episode had a lot
of this was cutting back and forth. So I'm not going in order necessarily of what we're talking about, but because we also learn that there was a Revolutionary War reenactment that happened the day before Jessica Roach was missing. So that's something that Brian Miller figures out. Yes. So that's another big clue that that pops up here.
Mm-hmm. I liked, I don't know if it was that specific one. I think it was the time before when he was on the phone with the detective, but he's fixing the window
Right. He's like
thing. And it's
WD-40ing
just
it
such a
and
mundane thing to do while you're on the phone. I think most people do stuff like
mhm.
that, where you're just doing something totally random while you're getting this big news for
Yeah.
something.
And he fixed it. Through
That
the
was
whole
funny.
phone
Yeah.
call, he fixed the,
Yeah.
the window wasn't working and then
I just thought it was, yeah. I just thought that was funny how he's just doing something so
yeah.
mundane.
It makes me wonder that, and another scene that I want to talk about in a second kind of makes me wonder like what if these kind of things are going to come into play later at some point. I don't know if it's going to
Yeah.
like be a hint of something cuz
Yeah.
later Brian Miller is talking on the phone to this same Indiana detective again, and they're on cell phones. Both of them are on cell phones, but it's
Hmm.
it's the early 90s. So it's
Yeah.
very low tech, the cell phone's
Yes.
huge. It takes up Greg Kinnear's whole face and
Hmm.
it's like buzzing and it's a bad connection and then the Drysdale's like, let me jump on my
Hmm.
landline. Yeah.
Landline.
So old tech.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought that was funny.
But that's also when Miller's just learning all these things about Larry. So he learns that
Hmm.
Larry's dad works as a grave digger, and Larry's kind of like
Hmm.
a weird guy, but the Indiana police basically consider him harmless.
Hmm.
They tell Miller that Larry confessed to a missing persons case in Marion, which
Right.
is referring to the Trisha Reitler
Hmm.
case,
But they said it was just him
that he's just all talk.
confessing. He just likes to confess to things, and he didn't have anything to do with
Right.
it.
They are
They
fully
actually ended up arresting somebody.
Yeah, and they're fully convinced that Larry is he's all talk and he's all harmless.
Yeah. Like he sees the stories in the paper and confesses, or just to get the attention or
Hmm.
something.
Also, Sammy comes to visit Jimmy in prison, so we're
Hmm.
cutting back and forth. But we're cutting back to Jimmy, and she tells Jimmy that his dad had a stroke and that his health is
Right.
not good.
Not great. Yeah. And you can see Jimmy's kind of fear
Yeah,
that, oh, my dad's not doing great. I need to do
yeah,
something.
and she puts the blame on Jimmy. She just spells it out like
Hmm.
the stress that you are putting on him is the reason why he's so sick
Yeah.
and that he's not going to live 10 years while you're in jail.
Right. He'll be lucky to live 3, I think she said.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. I think it was around this moment that you could start to feel suspense building
Right. This is kind of where the
with the
story where it's
music.
taking off.
Yeah, you can start to feel the momentum start to go. And I put, like, it was, my notes say 44-minute mark, suspense build. So it was you could feel that anticipation of something big is about to happen.
Right. And yeah, so that's Jimmy is meeting with Lauren McCauley again and he's like, "Okay, let's
Hmm.
do it. I'll do the deal." And she's like, "Oh,
Yeah.
actually, we're thinking about
You're just an
yeah,
applicant.
we're thinking about maybe going for someone else doing this. We're not just considering you, we're considering other people too."
Yeah. Well, it was funny because the scene starts with him being very cocky
Mhm.
and like, yeah, I'll do it. Like, of course, I'll be fine. And then when she says, you're not the only one being, looked at, he kind of gets that knocked down kind
Yeah,
of, oh,
taken down a peg a little bit.
yeah, that the air deflated out of his sails a little bit.
And so this is also cutting back to Brian Miller again, back and forth, back and
Hmm.
forth. This is when Brian Miller meets Larry for the first time, and so he meets
Yeah.
this Drysdale detective guy who he's been talking on the phone with this
Hmm.
whole time. They meet up for the first time. They go and they meet Larry in this like conference room type place.
Hmm.
There are other detectives there from the Marion case. And we see Detective
Hmm.
Russ Aborn for the first time,
Cullen.
played by Cullen
Is
Moss.
that Cullen? Yes. Who looks totally
He
different.
does. Yeah, I've never seen him look like that.
His birthday was just the other
It
day, by the
was
way.
the day
It's
of
the
the
7th.
episode premiere, wasn't it?
It was the 7th. Yep. He shares a birthday with Sophia Bush. I digress. One Tree Hill fans will get it.
If you guys are One Tree Hill fans, Kristen has another podcast all about One Tree Hill that you should
Yes.
check out.
This is the
This is
place.
the place. Find it on Spotify. I'll even link it in the show notes today.
Awesome.
But yeah, so this is when Miller and Larry meet for the first time, and he immediately compliments his burn sides. That's and he
Mm-hmm.
kind of gets in his good graces right away by calling them Burnsides, which according to Larry is the proper term for them.
Yes.
And they have a little chat.
Yes. I thought it was really interesting how Paul plays him without making eye contact. He looks down or over all of their heads when he's speaking, because it's almost like he's remembering these scenarios in his head. Because he thinks that they're dreams, it's almost like he's recalling them in his brain as dreams.
Yeah.
And so he's not making eye contact with anybody, and he kind of moves his head in a very almost calculated way
Yeah.
to try to recall these stories. I thought that was really like a cool acting choice to make that Paul did.
Yeah, I guess we should say that this is the first time we actually see
Mm-hmm.
Paul Walter Hauser as Larry in the show, which is kind of towards the
Mm-hmm.
end of the episode. And yeah, he is very serial killer-ish.
Almost meek. Like he comes across as very meek and
Right, because he has to come.
not
The
confident.
detectives in Indiana think he's like this nice guy. He's just
Mm-hmm.
kind of,
Like
yeah, just
harmless.
kind of a little weird, but
Yeah,
friendly,
quirky, and
not a murderer by any means.
yeah, just doesn't really understand social
Right,
situations.
but not. They don't even think he's connected to these murders at
Yeah,
all. He's just kind of
but
weird.
he's just talking. Yeah.
I did want to note that he says he would never dream of hurting two girls.
Mm-hmm.
And I just underlined two girls because I'm like,
Yeah.
is he saying he could dream of hurting one girl or
Right.
hurting
Well, he did say
40 girls?
he dreams of killing girls.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like he's having an out of body experience in his dream.
Yeah,
But I think it's because he's having an out of body experience. So it feels like a dream to him.
right. But yeah, he insists they're just dreams. They're just dreams.
Mm-hmm.
And the very last sort of expression that Larry has when he says they're just dreams is kind of gives you like
Mm-hmm.
a creepy vibe. So like you're
Yeah.
thinking like, oh, he's just like this meek little guy. Like, but then he said they're
Mm-hmm.
just dreams, and then he kind of looks at Miller through
Mm-hmm.
his eyebrows a little bit, and you're like, wait a second.
Because I think, and you'll learn this in our conversation with Hillel, is Larry was actually a very well-read guy.
Yes, he was smart.
Yeah, so I think he knows what's going on in this moment.
Yeah.
But his voice in the scene, well, his voice in the whole thing, but this specific scene, because it's the first time we see him, is like, oh, wow, this is going to be
Mm-hmm.
intense. Because it's just the way he plays it is really. In fact, my sister even said, I hope I don't watch him in anything else because this is going to scar me
Yeah, that happens with
from
a
him.
lot of actors who
Mm-hmm.
play sort of like really creepy guys, or
You can't get that out of your head.
that's kind
Yeah.
of how I feel about the guy who plays Ramsay in Game of Thrones. I'm like, oh no,
Oh.
he's the worst. He's the worst character in that entire show.
Yeah. Not to throw it back to One Tree Hill, but the actor that plays X, he's like a kidnapper type person. He's apparently the nicest man in the world, but I can't see him as anything but X. And so it's kind of creepy.
Yeah, hopefully, I think Paul Walter Hauser is kind of known enough as being like this comedy guy that hopefully
Yeah.
people aren't too freaked out by Paul
Yeah.
himself as a person. But yeah, so the episode basically ends with we just kind of see Jimmy in his cell reading Larry Hall's file, doing his
Mm-hmm.
homework, studying up on him, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah. End of Act 1. End of
End of
episode 1.
Act 1. End of Act 3 of episode 1. Yeah, so that was pilot. And yeah, so we're going to take a quick break and cut to our interview with Hillel Levin. I hope you guys
Enjoy. It's really good. It'll give you a lot of insight into both Jimmy and Larry and kind of the background so far.
yeah, and how rooted in reality this whole thing is.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, Hillel Levin, thank you so much for joining us. We're just really honored that you came on and wanted to talk to us today. So we really appreciate it. Thank you. How are you doing?
Happy to be here. I'm good, thanks.
Yes. Thank you so much for joining us.
We both have read the book In with the Devil and
Good.
really enjoyed it. We read it last year, and I kind of have skimmed through it since then, but it's
Okay. It's more than what a lot of screenwriters do. When they get the rights to your book, we actually had a screenwriter on this project who never read the book.
Really? On
Oh,
this
wow.
one? On this book?
Yeah,
Interesting. Well, I wonder
exactly.
why it didn't work out for them then.
Yeah.
Well, I enjoyed the book. I liked it, and so
Okay.
it makes me even more excited to watch the show now, knowing what the book was about.
Good to hear.
Yeah. So I guess we're just gonna jump in. We have a bunch of questions for you. So first of all, how did you become involved with Jimmy Keene and with writing his story?
Well, I was introduced to him by someone who's kind of a prison concierge.
Mm.
He works for a lawyer who specializes in sentencing. People don't understand that a big part of someone who's gone through the legal system is just not the trial, but when they get the sentence. And if they have a really good lawyer who specializes in that area, it can sometimes help them reduce the sentence and also have some input on where they ultimately want to go. And this individual also advises you on how best to deal with life in a prison and what to expect and all these other things. So he had talked to me in the past about some of his other clients, and he was the one that introduced me to Jimmy. Once I learned the story, I have an agent in uh, New York who's a literary agent who works with books, and I have an agent in LA who represents books for movie and TV projects. And this actually became a movie and TV project before it became a book.
Oh, wow.
Oh, okay.
That's
Um,
interesting.
and at that point, I was writing articles for Playboy, and I could do a piece for them that then would be the basis for a book deal or a movie deal. And the original movie deal was going to be with a producer who had produced a movie called The Departed.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
okay. And when was that?
This is now 2008.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
This
It's been a
is
while.
life in Hollywood. Yeah, everything moves at a snail's pace
Right.
if
It's
you're
either
lucky.
very slow or very
Yeah.
fast, it seems like.
If
Yeah.
if you're lucky, it moves at a snail's pace. And then they brought in a screenwriter who just, like I said, never read the book. It took him 3 years to write a script.
Oh, wow.
Nothing ever happened. On the other side, there was an actor who had grown up where that prison is in the book. I don't know how they're going to portray that prison in the TV series, but a very unusual place that was built in the same era as Alcatraz and Leavenworth and located in Springfield, Missouri, because that was the center of the continental United States. So it's going to be the psychiatric and medical hospital for severe cases of prisoners, whether they were in the East Coast or the West Coast or Leavenworth. And that would be, a convenient place to send them. And this actor who grew up in Springfield, Missouri, is named Brad Pitt.
Right. So
So
yeah,
Yeah.
we did read about when this project first came out. We read that Brad Pitt was originally sort of
yeah,
signed it up
Mhm.
to play the role, which was a
yeah.
long
I
time ago.
mean, and he took a real interest in it. And I've learned in my other projects that can be as much as a curse as a blessing,
Hmm.
Mhm.
because I mean, what you really want in a movie is a director.
Mhm.
That's more important than an actor. I mean, it sounds hard to believe, but the director is really committed. They're going to make it happen to the extent possible. And until you get a director attached, it's not going to be likely. But this was a project kind of on its head, where you had a studio commit first to a big time actor and then to a screenwriter, but there was never really a director who could take charge, which I think was key to getting a good screenplay and everything else.
Right.
So, that was an unusual. And then it went to different producers, and it ended up with someone named, I believe it's Richard Plepler. And he was, in those days, the head of HBO.
Oh, okay.
And he was the one who oversaw Game of Thrones, but most important, Sopranos. And then AT&T bought HBO, and he decided he didn't want to work for AT&T. But when he went to Apple TV, he took the book with him.
Oh.
And people don't know what producers do. I don't really fully know what.
I mean, yeah, it's a mystery. Yeah.
No,
it's a fancy title.
Here's an individual. They put together the right team, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It seems like it, for sure, just from what we can tell.
He did. He executive producers who you never know about, and then they got this great showrunner, Dennis Lehane, and then really got a very good cast. I know with you, starting with Taron Egerton.
Yeah.
He was what drew us in.
Paul Walter Hauser. My gosh, going on to, of course, Ray Liotta.
Yeah.
And Kinnear is really kind of the hero of the story. So.
Oh yeah, and yeah, just they got these big movie stars for these roles. It's it's very cool. It's gonna, I think, bring a lot of people to know the story.
Yeah, I agree.
So anyway, I just to backtrack. So I met Jim. I did that email. It was like a movie project. Then I had to finish the article for Playboy, which became the intellectual property. That's kind of like the foundation of a movie or TV project. And then spent a couple of years writing the book, which was kind of difficult. To figure out. It's a complicated story.
Yeah, definitely. And you, not only did you work with Jimmy, but you also interviewed Larry Hall for like that half of the story too.
At one point, I did manage to get through to him. And so, about a third of the book is Jimmy's story, which I think is very compelling. And people will find fascinating just his own history and why he felt he did need redemption, and the relationship with his father, which was really key, who's played by Ray Liotta in the series.
Yeah.
And then I felt my responsibility also was to fully understand Larry Hall outside of, his relationship with Jimmy. And this whole issue of serial killers, which to my surprise, really has not been dealt with very well in popular culture.
Right.
People know about Dexter and Silence of the Lambs.
Yeah. So
Mindhunter and has nothing to do with serial killers. Absolutely nothing. These guys can come in, the local police, in the case of Larry Hall, not only didn't catch him, they thought he was innocent. They were going to testify in his defense.
Wow.
So they know nothing of it's like saying if you have a murder in a jurisdiction, for a lot of police, that's like saying a serial killer did it. It's like saying a UFO landed in your backyard.
Right. So why is law enforcement so? It just seems like they're very against assuming that it's a serial killer. Why do you think that is?
Basic law enforcement, homicide investigation, it kind of starts with concentric circles around the victim. And I mean, literally, it starts with the family and it extends to the friends, and then it extends to the friends of friends, and then it goes out further to someone who could possibly be related in terms of in the same place at the same time, a first date, that kind of thing. So their discipline is really focused on finding that individual related to the victim. And then very often they just develop what they call tunnel vision,
Mm-hmm.
which is laser focused on, this was the bad boyfriend. Everybody hates him. Parents don't like him. Maybe he's got some kind of dicey personality. In the case of one of Larry's victims, there was someone who was in the same vicinity as the victim, the night she was abducted and killed. And he was a muscular black guy. He was a thief. Nothing in his background, however, said that he was ever guilty of sexual assault or murder or anything. But the police in that town really did not like him. And he was a pretty convenient, and he had a girlfriend who was working in the cafeteria where the victim was a college student was working. And it was that confluence of things. And that night he had stolen some copper. And so you had a few phone calls and that happened to converge. And as far as the police were concerned, that all kind of incriminated him. And
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, he probably received a much stiffer sentence. And the judge, when he sentenced him, said, "We all know what you really did." Because at that point, they never had any real evidence against him for abducting and killing that girl. But the implication from the judge is, we all know what you did.
They can only
And he
charge
got a
him.
real
Yeah.
12-year sentence for stealing a lot of copper pipes.
Wow.
But that's typical. I mean, if you research other serial killers, almost invariably some innocent person has been accused of the crime. And in some celebrated cases, like one here in Illinois, those people who were landscapers in the vicinity of where the young girl died were on death row and really close to execution. And the serial killer is not unlike Larry, by the way. Even talks like him. The DNA proved that in fact he was the one that did it. Um, and again, some of these prosecutors and unfortunately the families are so invested in those initial investigations that they can't believe anyone else did it.
Right.
And it's not unusual for them to really resist turning over DNA evidence to prove who the real killer was. But fortunately, in this case, they did, and those two people were ultimately, released.
Right. And so with Larry Hall eventually getting charged, he only got charged with kidnapping originally and got sentenced just for that. Why do you think, first of all, why
Well,
did it
it's
only go
really
that
weird.
far?
It's unusual,
Mhm.
and ultimately it's fortunate. But the way our criminal systems work, homicide is something that tends to be charged by the state. So if you're arrested in a state and guilty of, some part of that crime in that state, it's the state's laws that govern. And it's the state authorities that prosecute you. The local police, the local prosecutor, the county prosecutor in many cases. So I believe that if the Jessica Roach, the girl he was ultimately convicted of killing,
Right.
that if it had only ended up inside of Indiana, I don't think they would have ever convicted him. because again, the police and even the forensic people were really incompetent, and the local police never saw him as any kind of threat. But what he did with this victim was he went over the state line. So she actually was in Illinois where she was abducted. And because he crossed state lines, it had the potential to be a federal case. And unless you kill someone for a goal of terrorism or a hate crime, you cannot be charged with homicide.
Oh, that's interesting.
So the most severe crime they could charge him with was kidnapping. And when I say that was fortunate, is that then you got involved federal prosecutors who were really good. FBI, again, FBI is not good with serial killers, but they played a role, and it ended up being tried in federal court, not state court, in Illinois. And as the book says, I don't know how it's going to be dealt with in the TV series. The first time Larry was tried, the case went to the appeals court, federal appeals court, and they threw it out. So he had to be tried again. But nevertheless, I think, it was still a better venue to try him in than in Indiana.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And then he was sentenced to life.
Ultimately.
Yeah.
In the second, he was retried. So the first trial, they wanted to show he was a serial killer, and they really focused on this girl who was abducted on the college campus at Indiana Wesleyan University in Marion, Indiana. And her body was never found. And yet there was an incredible amount of incriminating evidence against Larry. And he had somewhat confessed. Like a lot of the serial killers, I mean, they live with this monster inside them, and a lot of them do confess, then they pull back, they realize consequences of their confession could get them killed or executed. But nevertheless, he said enough that really was unknown to anybody but the killer that could have got him executed with that second case. So the first trial tried to show both Jessica Roach in Illinois and this young woman, Reitler in Indiana. And then the second trial, they left out Reitler and just focused on Roach.
Just to get that conviction.
Abducted in the cornfield. Yeah. Not to overdo it. But again, the reason the case was thrown out was, the judge was very strict about bringing in consultants who would say Larry had been coerced into a confession. And the consultant hadn't even interviewed Larry, but just looked at tapes and things like that, which is why the judge did not think it was he thought the jury could make up its own mind. And then Larry on the stand was not, he kind of showed his true self in that first trial. And that showed he was not some simple guy who was going to be rolled over.
Right. He was kind of smarter than people thought he was.
Yeah, totally. I think that had an impact as well. The second trial, they didn't bring in that second case, and he did not testify in his defense.
Are there traits in Larry that are like something that you can find in all serial killers or in most serial killers? Like, is there a lot of...
Well, like I say in the book, that of the 24 or so traits that people find in the typical serial killer, running those by Larry is like running uranium by a Geiger counter. He just hits 14 of them. you know, number one, it's deeply organic. The worst killers have something related to a brain issue. Very often, I mean, in the case of like the most famous serial killer in Illinois is John Wayne Gacy,
Sure.
who killed, I think, like 31 young men. And he was dropped on his head as a baby. Bundy, I forget exactly what his issue was, but he had another. I mean, it's kind of fascinating how many of these people had neonatal or just soon after they're born, they have brain damage.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
the bizarre thing with Larry, in many ways, is he was an identical twin, and he was a syndrome where his twin named Gary, so you got Larry and Gary,
Mm-hmm.
was actually positioned in the womb in a way that he got more nutrition and more oxygen than Larry. And these babies often emerge with not looking anything alike.
Is that true? That's true with Larry and
Even
Gary.
even though they're identical twins, they don't look a lot alike. And that
Mm.
was the case with Larry and Gary. Gary was a little smaller, better looking. Larry was kind of puffy and had a lot of acne as they grew up, and people thought he was slow, which was not the case, but had a different personality. And like Gary's very gregarious, but when he emerged from the womb, he was blue, and clearly there was some oxygen deprivation
Yeah.
at that point. So that's something that ticks off when you know that. A very difficult upbringing, in poverty, not unusual. Alcoholic, abusive father, that's the case. A smothering mother, everybody thinks about Psycho, and
Right.
two sides of that. There are abusive mothers who the serial killers basically want to kill the women who look like the mother. Then you have the smothering mother who pretty much makes it difficult to have a normal relationship with a woman.
Right. They want someone who lives up to their mom,
Right.
to the idea that they have of women.
Yes, and definitely the case with Larry. I mean, this guy could do horrible things to women, and yet his on the phone, other inmates and social workers would tell me, "Oh, sweetie, darling, how are you? I love you." All these other, I mean, which isn't that doesn't mean you're a serial killer, but there was
Yeah.
that element to Larry that was above and beyond
Hmm.
what
Right.
people would talk about with their mother. So, all these different socioeconomic issues, the biologic issues, other inadequacies. And then, you have this kind of condition that is, I mean, Larry was very focused on werewolves,
Oh,
did
yeah.
a lot of drawings and things like that. I don't know if he fully understood that. Again, I mean, this guy was really well read in a lot of ways. But
Is that sort of the impression that you got from speaking with him directly, or just from your research?
yes, totally. And then
Mm.
talking to people who knew him.
Yeah.
Uh, but the werewolf is a real good analogy to serial killers, because at one point they look, I mean, and again, this is where they're not Hannibal Lecter. A lot of them they're not Henry Portrait of Serial Killer. These are not weird looking people, which is why they're so dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
Larry had this little voice and kind of seemed pathetic sometimes in some ways, but certainly friendly. And that's why young women would approach them and they turn their back, and he'd have a rag soaked in starter fluid, which you used to use to put on a carburetor to start a car. but which has a lot of ether,
Mhm.
and that would incapacitate even a strong young woman. And that's how this one guy could take over. Now he was not a weakling either. He had a certain amount of strength about him, as some people discovered. But nevertheless, the appearance was very meek and mild,
Mhm.
and that is not unusual. But then, like the werewolf, the other side comes out, and it is ferocious. It has no empathy and can do horrible things. And if you look into the whole ideology of werewolves, they really think these go back to the Middle Ages, where you had these noblemen who would start doing things like, killing all the kids in their village, and being able to get away with it. And, just, horrible mass murder that they did because they could get away with it. And a lot of the stories, the original werewolf stories, kind of spring from that history. That is another element of some of these most dangerous serial killers. And the other thing really interesting about Larry is, despite his shyness, his awkwardness, his issues with women, a lot of these guys adopt this mask of what they see as being normal in society. So in the case of John Wayne Gacy, he had a little private construction business, but he's also involved in politics, and he was known in his community as a pogo the clown. And he'd,
Hmm.
dress up as a clown and do benefits. And, Bundy would get involved in party politics and, believe it or not, like anti-rape groups and the colleges he was in. And again, some of it, this behavior helps them find potential victims. So it's not all just, out of the pureness of their heart,
Right.
but it's also this desire to be a part of society in a way that is still really artificial. I mean, so these people just don't know how to connect. And in the case of Larry, he got deeply into Civil War reenactment.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
And to the extent where at one point he wanted to look like someone named General Burnham, who was famous for General Burnside was famous for his elaborate mustache
Yeah.
and
Right. That famous facial
sideburns.
hair.
And then he grew that, to have Burnsides, and then ultimately realized that the real general was like a lot taller.
Oh.
In the world, that's not good enough. You're too short. Don't even try. But he kept those mutton chop sideburns and
Right.
mustache, which, by the way, made him really recognizable.
Right.
I
Yeah.
mean, you think like, man, this guy would want to blend in with the woodwork. So it's kind of hard to, make these things fit together. And yet they really are part of one person who really feels he's not fitting in with society and does these more elaborate, ostentatious things that can call attention to himself.
Do you think that contributed to why Larry and Jimmy sort of were able to connect? Was that sort of a
Well, I think it
similarity?
was very difficult for Jimmy to figure out how to connect with him because he was so different.
Mm-hmm.
This was not a guy into sports. This was not a guy, Larry had a lot of interests that had nothing to do with Jimmy Keene's interests.
Yeah.
In addition to the Civil War reenactment, he would also collect, Native American memorabilia, and he and his brother believed that they were part Miami Indian.
Okay.
I don't think it's true. I certainly spent a lot of time trying to see if that was true. But in Indiana, of course, Indian, uh,
Right.
Like so much of our area in the Midwest and the United States, we've
Yeah,
got
that seems like a very
Mhm.
American, like,
Native American names all around us.
Right.
yeah.
But, in most states, people really don't identify with Indians at all and hardly even know what the names relate to. But believe it or not, in Indiana, especially where they grew up, there was kind of a cool mystic thing about it. And the Miami Indians, who were the prominent tribe in that area, were that unique tribe that said, okay, this is what we're dealing with. We got to act like the white man. We got to, do everything to assimilate in society. And in return for that, they were removed like everybody else.
Mhm.
And then when they came back to Indiana, they did not get a reservation like a lot of tribes. They got some money, and that was it. But because there was no isolation or ghettoization with a reservation, they were very much tied into society. And a lot of people growing up, especially Larry and Gary, thought that it was really cool to be an Indian. And they would find, a lot of the arrowheads and things like that, which was another element of Larry's background that made him so dangerous, is he knew where all these farmer fields were and all the woods were,
Mm-hmm.
perfect places to bury people. But a lot of that was, their two big hobbies were finding those arrowheads and finding discarded beer cans, which they collected. Which was kind of a big thing in those days. Not, Budweiser, but all these brands that, are no more. So as a result of that, these guys were in dumps and farm fields and stuff that, later gave them an idea where to bury people. So, but the Indian thing becomes really important to the story because it's not a blackbird necessarily that he's carving. Again, I don't know what the
Yeah,
series is.
that's kind of
Yeah.
still a mystery for us too. We're not sure where this
It's
blackbird.
it's a falcon. I don't want to spoil things, but he's carving falcons.
Well,
And originally, we wanted to call the book A
Yeah.
Falcon's Tale before we came up with In with the Devil.
so that was the book's original title, was going to be The
A
Falcon's
Falcon's
Tale.
Tale.
Okay.
And then that got converted to Blackbird. But the publishers thought that was too literary. They're like true crime people are not literary. Book publishers don't have a lot of respect for true crime, unfortunately. So they thought In with the Devil was what true crime readers wanted to read.
I mean, it is very catchy. It's very
It's a gripping
attention grabbing.
Do you still keep in touch with Jimmy? Do you have a relationship with him now, or?
We had a professional relationship.
Okay.
That's not friendly. I've written other books with other people. I wrote this book. I think you mentioned, Sarah, that you looked at it, called When Corruption Was King.
Yes. Yeah. And I actually listened to the podcast that you talked about too. The one that Jake Halpern did. I
Yes.
listened to that, which is a pretty good dive in, like a good update to Bob Cooley's story.
Yes. And I just want to say, I'm a professional journalist and a reporter since 78, 79. And to me, there's a wall that has to exist.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously, we both want the book to be successful. But like I said to Jimmy and I said to Bob Cooley, who When Corruption Was King is about, I'm not here to be I'm not your PR guy.
Right.
Right.
My first responsibility is not to you, it's to the reader.
Yeah.
Right.
To the story.
And I really have to do the grunt work. First of all, exactly what you just said. It's got to be a good story.
Mm-hmm. Which both of these stories are, for sure. I mean, with Robert Cooley and with Jimmy, they're both really stories that definitely, need to be told, I think, and
Right.
there's an audience for them both for sure.
Yep.
And I think the way you set it up with you writing it that way without that friendship kind of, I think that is portrayed in the book where the story is the focal point. It's not fluffy or anything. It's the true grit of the story.
And you got to take people where they don't want to go.
Right.
With Jimmy, where that was really, with both of them, I kind of coincidentally, it was the relationship with the father. And that was really hard for them. And it sounds like that really comes off very well in the TV series. You cannot, if I had written that as fiction.
Yeah, it's crazy.
You guys know what the whole movie baloney. You got to have an arc, and start out here,
Yeah.
and go here, and look at the verdict and how that, all of that stuff. This was true. I mean, this guy's life, the arc was just unbelievable, and I feel the same thing with Jimmy Keene. I mean, he had to see something in himself. He had an experience. I mean, this was a guy who got into trouble because he just felt he was above the law and too smart to ever get caught. And he could deal with the Mexican drug dealers. He could deal with the local investigators and always win. And finally, he gets into a situation where, that's not good enough.
Right. I mean, it did work for him for a while there.
And he goes through an experience, again, without a spoiler, that forever changed his life. And, I have no doubt that he would ever do anything illegal again.
Yeah.
After what he's gone through. So, that's his arc.
Yeah. What was the connection that you mentioned between Bob Cooley and Jimmy and their stories?
Well, Jimmy, without even realizing it, was sharing a cell with the leader of the Chicago mob.
Oh, wow.
Oh.
Had no clue until I said, who? And the guy's name is Calabrese. And just like Cardo, I mean, this guy started out as the worst, most violent physical bomb blasting character. And then, developed some sense of leadership and management style. But again, for a mob that was a shadow of what it was under Ricardo. And then, became fairly famous in Chicago because he was ultimately tried in something they called family secrets. And it was his brother and son who testified against him.
Oh, wow.
And some other mob leaders, and really closed the circle on some really infamous executions and murders that no one had, everyone had a suspicion why these people died. But, in this family secrets trial, it was made clear, this is who killed them. This is how we killed them. And again, Jimmy was totally oblivious to that. And the father, who he just thought was like a great father. Again, this is all the father and son. At a certain point, when the son has to go to prison too, the father's like, he's a young guy like you. You guys should be cellmates.
Right.
And so I'm going to get out of here and you guys will be cellmates.
Yeah.
Wow. Then knew the son. But at that point, he gets transferred to meet Larry.
Yeah. So and that's in your book there, and I think that's like chapter 2, I think, if I remember.
Yeah. So I did not, ever understand. When I met Jimmy, I had no idea that those things would link up. It's like, what? Jimmy Frank Calabrese, really? Yeah, he was kind of an important guy in the mob, right? Yeah.
Having deja vu looking at this guy again.
Yeah.
That's a fun connection.
Are you planning on watching Blackbird at all, or are you looking forward to it?
Yeah, I'll watch it at some point, for sure.
Okay. All right, sounds good. Yeah, thank you so much. Is there anything else that you want to say, or is there any like future
Other
projects that you're
projects?
working on that you can talk about at all, or is there?
Well, not much, but it's, I've dealt with some cases that have been where people have been wrongfully convicted, but I have come across a case again in Indiana that's the worst I've ever seen.
Oh wow.
So, and I think people are really fascinated with cold case investigations, but this
Mhm.
was a cold case investigation that cleared the killer and put an innocent man in prison for 40
Wow.
years.
Sounds like an interesting story.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So that's the current one I'm working on.
Right on. All
Well, we'll
right.
look forward to that.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to
Okay.
look out for that when things come to fruition for that. But yeah, thank you so much for doing
Thank
this with
you.
us. We really appreciate it.
Okay. No problem. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you. Thank you
Okay.
for writing such a great book.
Yes.
Okay. Glad you liked
Yeah.
it. Thank
All right. I hope you guys enjoyed that little bit of the interview. And like I said before, we're going to release the full interview as its own episode. So that should be coming pretty soon too. But for now, we need to get into episode 2.
Yeah.
So yeah, Kristen.
2 episodes this week. So episode 2 is called We Are Coming, Father Abraham. And the description is Agent Macaulay prepares Jimmy for the mission. Detective Miller questions Larry about the missing women, leading to a polygraph test.
Yeah, polygraph test. That whole scene.
Yes.
Oh man, we'll get to it.
Yeah. This one's a lot to unpack.
Yes. So the first episode is a lot of sort of exposition about Jimmy,
Mhm.
and we get a little bit about the case with Larry Hall, and then at the very end we see him for the first time, and so this one kind of gets a lot more into Larry Hall's side of things.
Yes.
But it still goes back and forth a lot, just like the first episode did.
And I feel like this one had less, well, it was still a lot of Jimmy, but it was a lot more Larry.
Yeah.
Like it had a lot more of that to it as opposed to.
Yeah. And it finally connects their two stories directly by the very end of the episode. So the first scene of the episode, we see a girl just walking down the sidewalk. This is Trisha Reitler, who's played by Rachel Looney. And so we see her walking down the road, and we see Larry Hall's van. And so he kind of pulls up in front of her, and she just walking down the sidewalk casually. And the camera is following her, and then it passes the van, and we see that she does not walk past the van. So she's been stopped.
Inside the van.
Yep. She disappears. And so we see Sapita Moafi meeting with Jimmy again. They go through this whole thing about what Jimmy likes about women, and we see him try and turn on the charm with her again. He's kind of like, hey, I like this connection we're making, and he's kind of trying to hit on her, and she's still not having it.
She kind of gives in a little bit, like kind of leans forward and like smiles to give him a little bit, like just to give him an inch so that he comes back with more.
Yeah.
She really knows how to play that game.
Yeah, because then she immediately flips it, and she's like, well, what do you think Larry Hall doesn't like about women? And brings it back to, like, sort of just brings it back to reality for Jimmy. And he's like, I don't know. Why would I know that?
Right. I don't
So
know who he is.
she's telling him, you need to figure it out. You need to find some way of connecting to Larry so that you will be useful to me in this.
Basically, do your homework.
Yes, exactly.
Otherwise, you're not going to get picked.
Right. And yeah, so we go back to Larry Hall in this conference room with Detective Miller and the other detectives from Indiana, and he's describing his dreams in a lot more detail. And he dreams that he kills women, and he's very insistent, like it's not like a fantasy that he's killing women, it's like this is what's happening in his dreams.
Right.
And he mentions his twin brother Gary for the first time here, which we'll learn about later in the episode. Man, this is a big episode. A lot happens.
My notes are very chaotic.
Yeah, mine too. And I have 2 sets of notes, and it's crazy. So this is when Miller shows Larry a picture of Jessica Roach, and he gets upset. He stops talking. He wants to go home. The Indiana detectives basically stop the whole thing, and they're like, "Yeah, we'll take you home, Larry. It's fine."
Yeah.
So this is when we see the detectives all butting heads, like the Indiana detectives and Miller, who's from Illinois, sort of don't see eye to eye exactly because
they don't think he did it. They think he's harmless.
They don't want him messing
but
around.
Miller knows like something's going on here. There's some red flags.
He's trying to follow his lead, and they're like, "This is not a lead. We have our guy in the Trisha Reitler case," and Miller even like insults their detective abilities. He's like, "Oh yeah, you guys are really great at your jobs, clearly," and they get really upset at that, and basically they tell him just to go back to Illinois and work on his own case and come back later. And that's when I think infamous line from Greg Kinnear, where the Indiana detectives tell him, "You respect our sandbox and we'll respect yours." And then it cuts to Miller in his car looking at them driving away, and he says,
"Fuck your sandbox."
Which is a line that everyone loves. I remember on the panel after the viewing, Dennis Lehane was like, "I just wanted to hear Greg Kinnear say, 'fuck your sandbox.' That's all I wanted to make this show for."
I still need to watch that. I tried not to watch a whole lot of stuff just so that I didn't get too many thoughts from other people into my own reviews.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I had to go back and watch a lot.
Meanwhile, I was like consuming everything. My brain is so full. All of my thoughts are Blackbird. There's no other thoughts, just Blackbird.
There's nothing wrong with that.
It's probably good as a host of a podcast all about it, right? That's all I'm thinking
good
about.
To have a lot of thoughts.
Fuck your sandbox. All right. And that is when Miller meets up with Lauren McCauley, which I think is this the first time we've seen them together?
Yeah, because I don't think they were even on the phone before that.
Yeah,
because she calls him later.
So this is the first time that they meet up, and they're at this diner and they're talking about the case, and they discuss that since Larry crossed state lines, that it's going to be a federal case, which, as you heard in Hillel Levin's interview, they typically are not tried federally. Murder cases are not.
Because he crossed state lines, they were able to do it federal.
I did want to note that during this scene, Lauren McCauley drenches her burger in mustard. Like, it's a lot of mustard.
She also does a little dance when her burger is
she like gasps and is so excited about food, which is,
as someone who loves food,
very relatable.
I do that. But I do not put that much mustard on my burger.
No. she goes for like 2 big full squeezes, and she put ketchup on it too. That is a wet burger. But so they talk about Beaumont, and that cuts to them meeting up with Beaumont and this agent who's going to run the polygraph, Mark Ellenberg. So they meet up with him and basically set up the polygraph for Larry. But before that happens, it cuts back to Jimmy and Lauren meeting up again, and he's being real cocky. He's like, "I think I am actually the only candidate that you're talking to." And he kind of gives all these reasons why he is the best person for the job. He's like, "I'm a black belt in Taekwondo," and all these things. So that's when Lauren's like, "Okay." And she shows him a full other candidate that they're considering for this job.
Which I think she just kind of brought somebody up to mess with his head.
Yeah, it's just like a mugshot, basically, that you can see. But she says all these things about him and how he's not as cocky and full of himself as like Jimmy is.
A champion fighter and all of this stuff. So,
yeah. So she's like,
knock Jimmy down a few pegs.
Which clearly he needs. He needs to be knocked down a little bit. And so she gets him to open up about his childhood. And convinces him that if he does get this job, is what they keep calling it, if he does get the job, she tells him to think about what it was like when he was a kid and really live in that moment, and it'll help him connect with Larry in that way.
That he has to kind of be his biggest cheerleader. That he's not going to let anything happen to him. And
so this cuts to Larry being brought in for the polygraph. So this is a really big moment. A lot of stuff happens in this that really did happen that affected the case. When he signs his waiver rights, he doesn't actually use a signature. He signs in block letters, and you see that right away. And then when the agent, who he insists that Larry calls him Mark, when he says it's, he's going to hook him up for a polygraph, Larry's like, "Oh no, I don't think I'm going to pass a polygraph."
And then he gets him to start just telling a story,
Yeah.
the stories about it. And meanwhile, Agent Lauren is watching and taking lots of notes.
Mm-hmm.
And then everybody else, Greg Kinnear is also watching.
Well, so actually, Greg Kinnear, when they first bring Larry in, Larry asks for some water. So Greg Kinnear goes and grabs him some water, and when he comes back in,
cone.
Yeah, a little cone, a little paper cone of water. And when he comes back in with this water, Greg shuts the door behind him and he's in the room with them. And then Larry says, he asks him to leave.
Would you mind leaving? Your energy makes me feel itchy.
Which I think is a very good line.
Yeah.
Like I feel that line. I've had people whose energy makes me feel itchy before. I felt that. Yeah, so Greg leaves. So they're all watching behind like a two-way mirror. Him and Lauren and the other detective, Drysdale. Yeah, so Larry just starts spilling everything, really. Mark kind of talks him into it. He shows him the picture of Jessica Roach again. And that's when Larry asks if he can touch her. So he picks up the picture and he starts confessing, and he gives all these details that are not publicly known about the case, like about the clothes that were folded up and things like that.
The earring that was ripped.
Which, none of it is public knowledge. And he says, like, normally I bury all of them. That was a big clue.
Yeah.
And he also doesn't like that someone else got credit for all this, that they arrested someone else. And the folded clothes was like a big thing. Like, he didn't fold the clothes. I folded the clothes.
Yeah, he shouldn't take credit for that. I did it.
Yeah. So he has this huge confession, which the agent, comes out of the room and talks to Greg and Drysdale. Not Greg. Sorry. I keep doing that. He talks to Brian Miller. And he's like, I need a confession form. Like, I need to get all this. I
need a computer.
Yeah.
ASAP.
I need it.
Which I was surprised they didn't record him. I feel like that they should have recorded it. Because I don't know.
But I think originally they were just going for the polygraph.
Yeah.
So maybe it might be also a thing of that time. Like, I don't know if they recorded everything that was going on in those rooms.
I guess if with the person signing it, that shows that they actually just said it. Oh, I had a thought.
Okay.
It just popped in my head. When they're giving Larry the consent form to be interviewed and he asks to read it first, I think that shows him, he's aware of what's happening. Like, he knows what he's doing, and that's why he asks to read it first. He's not dumb in any sense.
Right.
He knows what's going on.
Yeah. And it's just, and at that point it was just the waiver of his rights.
Yeah, to be allowed consent to be interviewed.
Yeah.
Basically.
But yeah, so they tell Brian Miller, like, you just reeled in a serial killer. Like, he just confessed to everything.
Yeah.
And so they rush to get this confession form filled out and ready to go and ready for him to sign. Agent Mark is like, he's very affected by what he just heard Larry say all these things.
And he's typing it extremely fast with everybody yelling. I guess they were yelling so they could get Larry to sign it before he changed his mind. Yeah,
because he was asking for a lawyer and stuff like that. So they had to get it quickly before anything else happened. And so Agent Mark here is stressed. He is typing fast. He makes some mistakes.
And they use a template.
Yeah.
Like a previously filled out confession form that they're typing over stuff.
Yep.
And so they're rushing.
They deleted everything out of the form, and when they went to change the name, they did not change the last name on the form.
Nope. Or the location.
Right.
Because I think the location was Tennessee.
So, yeah, they messed up a couple times just because they were so anxious to get this done. And so, yeah, the last name was Daniels on the form instead of Hall. And again, Larry prints his name and doesn't actually use the signature, which he's fully capable of doing.
Yes.
That's another clue into Larry being smarter than they think he is.
He knows what he's doing.
Yep. Yeah, so that was a huge moment in the case, and kind of what messes it up for them later when they're in court. But that comes later, because we're cutting back to Jimmy again. This is when Jimmy is finally able to talk to his dad again after hearing about his stroke, and he's not doing too well. He doesn't tell Jimmy everything about what's going wrong with him.
But you can hear it in his voice that he's holding back.
Yeah, and he says that to Sammy, his partner. He says that he has this shorthand with Jimmy where it's like, we don't have to say everything. We know we know what's going on between each other. And Sammy is mad. Yeah, because she's mad that he hasn't told Jimmy, like, he had gone blind in one eye at one point, and he was really sick and couldn't talk at some points. Like, she thought that he should have told Jimmy a lot more about what's going on with his health.
But I feel like Big Jim didn't want to put on that extra stress onto Jimmy.
Right.
So,
but he's taking it all on himself instead.
Yeah. Which I think is a typical parent situation.
Yeah. Oh, the detectives are, once they get the confession from Larry, they search his house and his vans, which he has multiple vans, we figure out.
Yeah. But only one is super clean.
Yes.
Everything else is dirty and almost like a hoarder.
Yeah. And that's another big hint. There's all these big hints that are happening.
Yes.
But yeah, the cleanliness of his van, which is mentioned between Jimmy and Lauren later as like a big hint to how the DNA of his victims were never found anywhere on his stuff, because he's so good at cleaning. He worked as the
janitor, the best cleaner that the buildings have ever seen.
Yes. So he knew how to clean.
Because they mentioned when they open the clean van that it smells of like alcohol.
Yeah, all these cleaning products.
Disinfectant. And that's where we meet Gary, right?
Yeah, so Detective Miller talks to Gary for the first time, and Gary is fully on Larry's side. He's like, Larry's innocent. He hasn't done anything
he could never
wrong.
do it.
He's pissed that all this is happening. And so, that's Gary Hall, played by Jake McLaughlin.
Who looks nothing.
No, they look nothing alike, which is addressed in the next scene, because when Lauren and Jimmy meet up again, first of all, she questions Jimmy about the cleaning and stuff. And so that's how we figure that out.
Yes.
And then she tells Jimmy about Gary being his twin and about what happened in the womb to why they're so different.
Yes.
Which is also, again, addressed in Hillel Levin's interview. Yes. He talks about that. And so she tells
Jimmy's reaction to her explaining that was
right.
You could see like the confusion, but also, are you for real?
Yeah. And so she tells Jimmy to be the Gary to Larry, be like a brother figure, help him out, be on his side, and just drops on him. You have the job. We're leaving right now. Get on the plane.
Yep. Let's go.
Like, this is happening immediately.
And he looked almost afraid and panicked because he didn't know what do I do? Like, where do I go? What door do I walk out of?
Yeah, it was like a surprise. He didn't think he was going to leave today.
Yeah. I mean, not that he had a whole lot to pack, but.
Right. Yeah, so they get Jimmy to an airplane and he changes into street clothes.
And they get his cuffs get to come off too.
Yeah.
And I assume the other two guys were police officers playing.
Yeah, or like marshals, U.S. Marshals.
And they kind of befriended him as they got on the plane.
So, we should talk about this scene a little bit because in the book, this is a big thing where it's like the first time Jimmy feels like a normal person is when he's being transported between the prisons, because they really just they don't treat him like a prisoner at all. He's wearing normal clothes. Not in the show, but in the book, they take him to like a diner.
Yeah, I was just going to say that they drive him around.
Yeah, which they probably just couldn't have two diner scenes in the same episode. So they just had all this
cut it.
normalcy happen on the plane. But yeah, he has like banter with these guards on the plane.
They play cards.
Yeah, and they're talking about movies. And this is this is where you see Jimmy sort of a misogynistic side of him a little bit. Just kind of the way he's talking about the movies and about the actors and stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's the first time where he has like a sense of normalcy from a long time.
I think he's like enjoying that moment.
And then on the plane also, Lauren talks to Jimmy again and kind of is getting him prepped. And this is when I really wanted to emphasize this part. This is when she tells him that only the warden and his doctor are going to know what he's doing.
Yes.
So, which in the trailer, there's a certain CO.
Last episode of our podcast, I said that seems shady.
Yes.
Because I feel like the guard would not know that answer.
Yes. But in the trailer, this guard knows that Jimmy is here to snitch.
So something happens.
Something's happening. Only the warden and the doctor know.
Yes.
And Lauren is going to pose as Jimmy's girlfriend for
Yes.
whenever she has to visit him. And this is another time where she kind of is, you know,
playing into his misogynist.
She's so
ladies' man
smart.
type of a guy.
She knows how to get to him. And so
Mhm.
she says, like, slip me some tongue, whatever you need to do to sell it. And he's like, we can practice right now.
Yeah. His face was like, oh.
Right.
And then she shuts it down real quick.
She does. That's their dynamic. They kind of like, she lets him flirt with her for a second, and she kind of entices him a little bit, but then she's like, this is a job.
I'm an FBI agent. Sit down. So I'm curious to see, like, once she does have to play, like, his girlfriend when she goes and visits, like, how she'll play that.
Yeah, what we're going to see there.
Yeah. If she'll let him go far, but not, and then shut him down real quick once they're behind closed doors.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and also on the plane, one of the marshals kind of is like, hey, are you scared? Like, do you... And Jimmy kind of tries to play it off. Like, he doesn't say anything, but he's kind of smiling. And he's like, I'll get over it. And the guy's like, don't get over it. Like, stay scared, because cocky people make mistakes. Which I think is a glaring hint about what's going to happen. Because Jimmy is cocky and he's going to make mistakes.
And you can see it in this episode too.
Yep. And we're going to see more and more of that as the show goes on.
And they tell him at this point, like, don't talk to him tonight.
Yeah.
Like,
take it
give
slow.
it, like, learn about him, when he eats, where he sits, what he does. Like,
yeah, don't rush
play
into
the long
it.
game. Don't,
because he'll know. He'll know something's up if you talk to him right away.
Yeah.
So yes, going back to Larry for a second, we first of all, we see Miller in a hotel room, and he's watching TV, and he sees on the news that the Indiana police are breaking this case, and they say that Larry is a suspect in their case,
right?
Which
they've been working on it, and he was not happy.
Yeah, Greg Kinnear is big mad at these guys, and he knew this was going to happen, and he's still. So it shows, we go to Larry in shackles in the Indiana Police Department.
You two need any more pictures with him? I can hold the camera. There we go, Larry.
And Miller's there to drive him back to Illinois to try him.
Which I feel like was not the safest thing to do, just driving him in his car.
Right.
But, just it was the 90s, so things were different.
Yeah, no guards or anything.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, he's a cop, I guess.
But you would think he'd have, like, some sort of, like, this is a suspected murderer. You would think you would have some sort of, I guess he was handcuffed in the car, but.
Yeah, he's in shackles, and at the same time, he's also not, he doesn't seem threatening. So maybe that's part of it.
Maybe.
That that they're not suspecting him of being a threatening person, even though they're also suspecting him of being a murderer.
Right. And he tries to get him to talk about it.
Yeah.
And Larry's just not.
Yeah. So this is when Larry's like, you coerced this confession out of me. I wouldn't have said that. You forced me to say it.
My lawyer said not to talk to you.
Yeah. And the more that Miller is, like, pushing, it really is upsetting Larry. And then he just busts out into song.
Which is where the title of the episode came from.
Right. The Father Abraham song. Oh, so so back to Jimmy for a second. He is he's off the plane, and he's in a van driving to the prison, and he's talking to the guards. They're having more sort of casual, normal conversation. All the guards are talking about their kids at various ages.
Jimmy notices a wedding ring on one of the guards' hand, and he asks them, do you have kids? And then they are all bantering about the different ages that their children are and the different struggles that they have.
And just sort of just talking about normal life stuff.
And I think that you kind of see it in Jimmy's face, like, I'm not going to have that. Like, that's just not going to be me. I could lose it all.
It's more about what his dad was talking about, this normal life, kids, stuff that he just doesn't get.
Yeah. I think the fear of what's to come is starting to sink in this moment.
It is. Yeah, because Jimmy starts to kind of second guess the situation, and I think he's questioning in his mind if Beaumont is lying, And
Right.
well, he says it. He says, like,
Mhm.
what if Beaumont's not
Yeah.
holding up his end of the deal? Because they have that sort of distrust
Mm-hmm. Like he
where,
could be lying to me.
yeah. And so he's like, I don't think I want to do this anymore.
Yeah.
And the guard, the guard in the front seat of the van is like pissed off. He's
Yeah.
like, you have to do this. This
Yeah.
is a serial killer
There's
that's
no
gonna,
choice.
yeah, like this serial killer is gonna go free if you don't do this. You need to do it.
And in the book, don't they, like, this Jimmy has that doubt and then they drive around again for a little bit.
They just do
And then,
laps
yeah.
around the prison.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because he's just nervous.
Mm-hmm. But then he finally is like, okay, I'll do it.
Fuck it, let's do it.
Before we get too far from this scene, from last episode of our podcast, we talk about Taryn's hair. And in the van, it looks way lighter. And I don't know if it's the light in the van or the lack of light, but his hair looks completely different than it did when he was walking on the plane.
Yeah, so this
I am completely confused.
This is our Taryn hair tracker.
Yes.
We need to track his hair. So I guess in episode 1, it's very dark, and even in like in the shower, it's very thick and dark. But yeah, in this moment in the van, it's kind of closer to his natural brown hair color.
And it could, because he's in the van, they show a lot of his face close. His hairline is real. Like you can see where he had to shave his head for Rocket Man and the hairline that came back after that.
Right.
And the root looks light, like his normal color light. So I'm confused.
So if anyone has insight into this hair debacle, we really need answers about what happened with Taron Egerton's hair.
Yes. But I digress.
Anyway. Taron hair tracker, turn it on. And so we cut to Larry Hall, his appeal hearing. His appeal is granted. Mm-hmm. And so
because of the loopholes.
Right. Because of all the things that went wrong with the interrogation stuff, his appeal is granted. And that basically puts a clock on them needing to get a real confession out of Larry. And basically they figure out that they need Jimmy to work quickly to get Larry to talk so that he doesn't walk free. And Macaulay says that she told Jimmy to take it slow, but they said that they have like a month before stuff gets going on Hall's appeals and freedom and stuff. But then we see Larry in prison for a second.
Is he's mopping? Is that one?
I think so.
Yeah.
And then we see Jimmy coming into the prison. And so we see Theo Carter escorts Jimmy to do the strip search.
And that is played by Joe Williamson.
Yes. And he's really just kind of casual and friendly with him. He calls him Bud a bunch of times. And he's escorting him to his cell. And he's like, hang in there. The first week is the worst. Kind of trying to be friendly with him.
Yeah, when they were, before he does the strip search and he has to put all of his belongings into the bucket, he's pulling things out, and they must have just shoved things in his pocket for him, because as he's pulling them out, he's shocked at what he's pulling out of his pockets, like a wallet, keys, money, all this random, like they just shoved things in his pockets for him.
Right, because he didn't have anything before. I mean, he was in jail. He was in prison before.
They just like shoved things in his pockets.
Yeah.
But you could see him like confused as he's pulling things out of his pockets.
He's like, this is not mine.
Just thought that was funny.
Yeah, that's a very good detail that the detectives kind of planted there.
Yeah.
And
so he's in the cell.
Yeah, and then we also see Larry. So now Larry and Jimmy are in the same place. They haven't connected at all yet, but we see like when it's cutting back and forth between Larry and Jimmy now, they're in the same prison.
Yeah.
Larry is like working on the boiler, and he's talking to this other CO about what's going wrong with this boiler.
Like you get the impression that he's the go-to guy to fix things. So they let him fix the broiler kind of unattended too.
Yeah, it's just him, and then this one CO kind of checks in on him, and he asks Larry if he wants him to bring him any food,
Mm-hmm.
like so he can just keep working through,
Mm-hmm.
which I thought was interesting because I'm pretty sure in the book In with the Devil, the first time Jimmy sees Larry anyway is in the mess hall. So that's kind of what I was expecting for him to see him there for the first time, but that doesn't happen.
No, but you do notice that Jimmy is sitting by himself and is kind of the realization of where he is
Mhm.
sinking in because he's around people that are extremely dangerous.
Yeah, like these big. He
Murders.
kind of looks at all like the different gangs,
Mm-hmm.
the prison gangs and stuff.
Yeah.
And it's starting to sink in for him a little
Mhm.
bit. I think it's gonna really hit him hard later
Yeah.
too. But
Yeah.
and yeah, so we see Big Jim tries to call Jimmy in prison again, but he's moved and they haven't told him where or how to contact him. Apparently he needs like a court order in order to know where he's gone. So that is hard.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting that nobody called his family to let him know that.
Yeah. Well, I think it just happened very quickly.
Mhm.
I mean, Big Jim is still going to play a big part in this
Yes.
whole thing, so they're going to connect again. I think Jimmy probably has to be the one to initiate the contact again. And the other thing about that is he's basically undercover, so he can't really
say
talk to anyone. Yeah, and he can't talk to anyone about his case or what he's doing in this big prison.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously Big Jim knows why he's there, but if someone overhears their phone conversations or something, then that could be a problem. So I think maybe something like that might be what clues in the guard into knowing about the story. That's my guess.
That was
I don't have anything to back that up.
He overhears a conversation that Jimmy's having with Lauren or somebody.
Yeah, and he just kind of clocks it,
figures it out.
Yeah, which could cause problems.
Or the way he's watching Larry.
Yeah,
gives him a clue.
Yeah, I'm on CO Carter watch. I'm on Taryn's hair watch. Got a lot of things to track here.
Figure it out.
And then
it's
so
nighttime.
Oh, but so well, yeah. So before that, though, I wanted to talk about we see Brian Miller at the table with his daughter, and his daughter's doing homework, listening to music. I just love what his daughter says here, because he's like, how can you do homework while you're listening to music? And she's like, I get straight A's, so whenever that stops happening, then you can make it a problem. But for now, I'm going to do this. And he basically looks at her like, okay, fair enough.
Yeah. All right, then. And he gets a phone call from Lauren.
Yeah, and she wants him to work this case with her and tells him that she has a guy on the inside.
And they're going to figure it out.
Yeah. And he tells her, like, this is dumb. This is dumb.
It's not gonna work.
You shouldn't do that. This is not real police work that you're doing right now. But yeah, so at the end, Jimmy is locked in his cell for the night, and there's all these like noises. There's like people laughing and screaming and kind of general chaos of this criminally insane prison.
Yeah. So he's having a hard time falling asleep and getting out of his head.
Yeah, and then this is when we see Larry escorted back to his cell after working on the boiler all day, and the guard says, "Good night, Larry," and Jimmy clocks that like, "Oh, that's Larry.
That's who it is."
That's who it is. So he kind of gets up, and this is the moment where Jimmy and Larry see each other for the first time. They're in cells that are kind of close to each other,
like
and they can
catty corner,
like kitty corner.
Yeah,
and so they kind of stare in the dark
it's
through
very
the bars.
Intense, because I thought in my brain, because the way it was set up, that's when Larry was going to say, "Why are you looking at me like you know me?"
Yeah, I was expecting that too. Like, I was waiting for that line from the trailer.
And it's such a creepy line in the way he says it. And so I was anticipating. I don't think I breathed that whole last bit because I was anticipating it.
Yeah, and again, like the music really ties that moment over too. It just this kind of underlying tone. Really intense.
And then it just went to black.
And that's the end of the episode. Yeah. Oh my goodness, so good. This show is so good already. Just the first little bit that we've seen. I think the pacing is really good. I think the back and forth between Larry and Jimmy story, and the Brian Miller investigation, and then the Lauren McCauley side of things, and then it finally all connects towards the end of this episode.
Kind of like 3 stories in one.
Yeah,
it's Larry's, Jimmy's, and then the detective side.
Yeah.
So I liked how they told all 3 and then they all merged. together.
Yeah. The fact that these stories are so woven together, and it kind of seemed like the stories kind of seemed separate, but they, like, you knew that they were going to come together eventually, and the end of episode 2 is kind of when it all starts to come together for everything. And so now I think episode 3 is really going to take off.
I think 3 is going to be a tough episode. I think it's going to be super intense, and I'm glad there's only one episode next week.
Yeah, I think we're going to have a lot to talk about, because episode 3, first of all, from interviews from Taryn and from what I've heard from other actors and stuff, episode 3 is big, and especially the ending of the episode is going to be something to look out for.
Waiting for episode 4.
Yeah, it's going to leave you hanging and leave you wanting more.
It's probably good that we don't have 2 back to back, because even between episode 1 and episode 2, I took a break. I watched episode 1 on Thursday and episode 2 on Friday, because I'm a baby and can't watch stuff like that late at night. So I have to decompress my brain.
Right. And so much happens. You know, the beginning of a show like this, they have to give you tons of information all at once. So it's a lot to take in.
Yes.
So first of all, this episode is going to be a very long episode. So sorry about that. Thank you for sticking with us if you've listened for the whole thing. But yeah, so is there anything else you wanted to say about, like, just the show in general?
I mean, I'm excited. I hope for the cast and crew, for all of their work on it, they get recognition.
Yes.
For it. And they already are getting, rave reviews. Good Morning America posted a amazing article about them. I think it's got a 98% on Rotten Tomatoes. So it's like doing really well.
Yeah, people are liking it.
Yeah. So I hope, because you can tell they just put their blood, sweat, and tears in it, that they get some sort of recognition for it.
For sure.
Whether that's Emmy nominations, Golden Globes eventually. Apple TV doesn't promote very well or much.
Yeah,
and I think that's just what they do, because a lot of their shows, you don't see a whole lot of promotion for it unless you're watching Apple TV, and then you see the commercials.
Yeah, like through searching through, like, YouTube and stuff for Blackbird things, I've seen, like, just other Apple TV, like, that's where they advertise. Apple TV is under other Apple TV shows.
Yeah, so I don't think they mainstream their promotion, which that's just something that I guess that they do. But although, like, Hulu doesn't advertise on other things, you just see their ads on Hulu. But I guess because Apple TV is such a small streaming network compared to Hulu and Netflix,
it's relatively new,
and you really, if you don't have Apple, like an iPhone or an iPad or any type of Apple product, you probably don't realize that you can watch Apple TV without.
Yeah, it's its own thing.
You don't need an Apple product to watch Apple TV. You can.
Yeah, you don't need an Apple TV to watch Apple TV Plus.
No.
It's just a streaming service that you can buy just like any other one. Yeah, I can talk for hours about how Apple TV Plus is a really good streaming service, but they don't do themselves any favors as far as advertising goes.
There is a 7-day free trial.
Yeah.
And it's only $4.99 a month. Or if you buy a new iPhone, an Apple Watch, an iPad, any Apple product, you get 3 months free.
Yeah. Anyway.
And sometimes they run specials and you get 6 months free, because that's what happened.
Now that our Apple TV Plus ad is over,
Apple TV can pay me.
This episode is sponsored by Apple TV Plus. No, it's not. We're doing their jobs for them by talking about this show.
We're doing their promotion.
Yeah. Whoops.
But long story short, I hope that they get the recognition without all of the heavy promotion.
For sure.
I think having bigger names like Greg Kinnear and Ray Liotta will help get the word out.
Literal movie stars in this show.
Yeah. And, Taryn is a recognizable name.
Yeah.
Because he's been in a blockbuster movie. Paul Walter Hauser's a recognizable name.
Yeah.
So I think that'll help them a little bit.
Definitely.
And then once you watch the first episode, you'll be like, oh, this is great.
Yes. Yeah. Once you see the show, it kind of starts to sell itself, because you want to know what happens. And I think that the end of episode 2 is a really good sort of, like, not a cliffhanger necessarily, but really, like, stuff is about to happen.
Gripping.
They're meeting up.
Like, it grips you.
The story is about to explode. So really good show so far.
I'm excited for episode 3. And they didn't show, like, a preview clip, right?
No. The only thing is there's a couple of images, like a couple of promotional stills that they have up, and then they have an episode description of episode 3 up.
Yeah.
Definitely tune in to our show next week when we talk about episode 3. This is going to be probably one of our biggest episodes of the podcast. Not giving anything away, but you are not going to want to miss it. It's going to be amazing. This is the one that I've been waiting for since the start of the episode, or the start of the podcast.
Yes.
Episode 3 is going to be called Hand to Mouth, and we will talk about that next week.
Yeah, I'm excited. Or use another word than excited. I'm thrilled. I'm waiting with bated breath.
Anticipating
the
arrival of the next episode. The next episode
I'm stoked.
Yeah, let's run through all of our verbiage now so that we know what to say besides excited. My sister said if for some reason we end up selling merch of our show, it just has to say excited. Excited. But yeah, I think that's going to be it for us this week.
Let us know what you thought of not only our episode, but our interview with Hillel too.
Yeah.
And look forward to the full interview.
Yes, that's coming soon. And let us know what we missed. Is there anything that we should have talked about? Is there anything that you want us to talk about in our next episode, episode 3? Is there anything you're looking forward to? What are your theories? We want to hear about all of it. So you can reach us on social media. We are on Instagram at Devil Details Pod, also on Twitter at Devil Details Pod. You can message us, comment, tweet, all that stuff.
And thank you to everybody who shared the posts and information about the podcast last week.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you for all your kind words that you left on the posts.
Definitely. We're super glad to hear from everyone.
Yes.
So we'll talk to you guys next week.
Oh, no.
Oh.
We ran out of time.
Wait, ran out of time for what?
Aaron. He was supposed to come on the show today.
Oh my gosh, I completely forgot. Taron Egerton was supposed to be on this episode.
He called yesterday and was confirmed, and then we just ran out of time. So, Taron, if you're listening, I'm sorry.
This
we ran out of time.
Happening. Oh my gosh. So
maybe
sorry.
Next week.
Sorry to Taron. We'll probably have time next week, maybe. We'll try to remember. Oh my gosh, how embarrassing. So sorry, guys.
So unprofessional.
Anyway, we'll talk to you next week. Thank you.
See ya.
Bye.